The pool was supposed to be my peaceful place. After a long day, I'd go out back, dip my feet in the water, and just let the noise of life fade away. I worked hard to afford this place. The backyard, the privacy, the view. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. So when random kids from down the street started showing up, helping themselves to my pool, it didn't take long for things to feel off. At first, I let it slide. I figured maybe they thought it was part of a shared amenity. The neighborhood had a history of being a little loose with property lines. I tried to be understanding, but it wasn't just kids. Adults started wandering in too. One guy even brought a cooler, sat himself in one of my chairs, and acted like I was intruding when I came outside. I knew then that I needed to do something. I didn't want to be the bad neighbor, but I also wasn't about to let people treat my backyard like a community center. So I put up a sign, private property, no trespassing. Thought that would be enough. It wasn't. A few days later, I found footprints along the edge of the pool. Wet footprints. Someone had been there while I was gone. My gate lock was untouched, but I noticed the latch was easy to open from the inside if you had long arms or were determined enough. It didn't matter what kind of fence you had if people thought they could ignore it. That's when I decided to install a smart lock on the pool gate. Nothing high-tech, just something simple with a keypad. I wanted to control who came in and who didn't. I didn't announce it. I didn't send out a newsletter. I just installed the lock, programmed the code, and finally felt like I could relax. The next morning, I was sipping coffee when I saw him. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, walking straight up to my gate like he owned the place. Hoodie pulled up, phone in one hand, the other jabbing numbers into the keypad. Over and over again. I opened the back door and stepped out. "Can I help you?" He froze, looked at me like I was the one out of place. "I'm trying to swim," he said. "This is private property." I told him. He rolled his eyes. "It's a community pool." "No, it's not," I replied. "It's my backyard. That pool belongs to me." He scoffed, then pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "The HOA says we have access. Everyone does." I took the paper. It was a general printout of the HOA rules, nothing specific to my property. No mention of the pool, no map. I handed it back. "This doesn't apply here," I said. "This pool is not an HOA facility. It's fully on my lot, and it's not open to the public." He stared at me like I just kicked his dog. "You just don't want me swimming because of who I am," he muttered. "You don't like people like me." I blinked. "What?" "You're a racist," he said loud and clear. "You locked us out because we don't look like you." I felt my chest tighten, not out of guilt, because I knew that wasn't true, but out of shock. This was my land, my pool. I hadn't spoken to this kid before, didn't know his name, didn't even know where he lived. But suddenly, I was being accused of something that had nothing to do with what was really happening. I kept my voice steady. "This is about trespassing, not race. That smart lock is there because people kept entering without permission." He took a step back, raised his phone, and said, "I'm calling my mom." Then he stormed off. I stood there, still holding my coffee, wondering what exactly I had just stepped into. I didn't yell. I didn't push. I didn't threaten. But somehow, I was now the villain in a story I didn't even know was being written. And if he really was calling his mom, I had a strong feeling this wasn't over. About an hour later, she arrived. I heard the sharp slam of a car door before I even saw her. I looked out the window, and there she was, marching up my driveway in those loud heels like she was on a mission. I knew instantly who she was. The posture, the hair, the energy. It screamed HOA. And from the way her eyes locked onto my house, I knew I was her next target. She didn't knock. She banged. Not once, but 3 hard hits like I owed her money. I opened the door slowly. She didn't give me a chance to speak. "You think you can just lock up a community pool and kick my son out?" she barked. I blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she snapped. "My son said you locked him out of the pool. That pool has been open for years. Everyone uses it." I stayed calm. "That pool is on my land. It's part of my property. It's not an HOA facility. Her eyes narrowed. So now you think you're above the rules? No, I said. I'm following the law. The fence is on my deed. The pool's not listed in any HOA documents as shared space. It's private. She laughed. A fake, dramatic laugh like she was in a soap opera. This is racial targeting, plain and simple. You saw my son and thought he didn't belong. I paused. No, I saw your son trying to break into my gate. That's trespassing. She didn't like that answer. She stepped closer, lowered her voice, and hissed, I've lived in this neighborhood longer than you. My son has swum in that pool for years. We never had an issue until you showed up. I didn't flinch. Then maybe the issue is that nobody ever told you it wasn't yours to use. That's when she pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. I nodded. Go ahead. I'll be waiting right here, with the property lines and the deed. And she did. Right there on my front porch. She dialed 911 and began with, Yes, I'd like to report a neighbor who's locking public resources and harassing my son over race. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled in, lights flashing, tires crunching against the gravel. I could already see a few curious neighbors peeking out from behind their blinds. Typical. The officers walked up calmly. Karen immediately jumped in front of them, like she was leading a protest. She started ranting about discrimination, her son's humiliation, and my abuse of power. The officers asked her to step aside so they could speak with both of us one at a time. One approached me while the other stayed with her. I pulled out a folder I had prepared days ago. I wasn't paranoid. I was just ready. Here's the deed. I said, flipping it open, here's the survey map. The fence is well within my property. The pool has no mention in the HOA shared amenities. I got the lock receipt and photos of trespassers from my security cameras. The officer nodded as he reviewed everything. So this isn't an HOA-maintained pool? Nope. Built by the previous owner. On private land. The HOA's map doesn't even touch this lot. The officer looked back at his partner, gave a slight nod, and walked over to Karen. I couldn't hear everything they said, but her tone changed quick. The confident shouting turned into defensive muttering. Her arms started waving. Her voice cracked like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. A few minutes later, both officers came back to me. One said, Sorry for the trouble. You're within your rights. But just so you know, if anyone tries to enter without permission, it's considered trespassing. You're good to go. I thanked him and walked back inside. Karen stood in my driveway, frozen like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. Her son had shown up by then, too, standing behind her, looking down at his phone like none of this was his fault. The officers left. Karen didn't say another word. She just got in her car, slammed the door even harder than before, and drove off in a rush. I stood in my living room, looking out the window, knowing full well this wasn't the end. People like her don't back down just because the law tells them to. She was embarrassed. And people like Karen don't forget embarrassment. They find new ways to stir trouble. And I had a strong feeling the HOA board was about to get involved.
The day of the HOA meeting came quicker than I expected. I didn't plan to speak, honestly. I just wanted to be there, to hear what was being said, to understand how far they were willing to go. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't about rules or access or harmony. This was about one neighbor who didn't get her way, twisting a simple boundary into something ugly. The clubhouse was already buzzing when I walked in. Neighbors filled every folding chair. Some looked over with polite nods. Others avoided my eyes altogether. Karen, of course, sat front and center with her arms crossed and that smug, pinched expression she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. Her son was beside her, staring at his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. The board president cleared his throat and welcomed everyone. He mentioned tensions, unrest, and concerns about access to shared community resources. Then he opened the floor for discussion. Karen's hand shot up before he even finished his sentence. She stood up and launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed, maybe even practiced in front of a mirror. She talked about how the neighborhood had always been inclusive, how her family had been here for years, how certain new residents were creating division. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Every glance in my direction made it clear who she was pointing fingers at. Then she brought up the smart lock. She called it unneighborly. Said it was cutting off children from safe, familiar spaces. Claimed it was a quiet form of discrimination hidden behind property lines. Some people in the room nodded along, clearly moved by her words, or maybe just afraid to be on the wrong side of the board. I sat there silently, waiting. And when she finally finished and sat down, the room was quiet. Awkward, waiting for someone to say something quiet. So I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match her tone. I just spoke plainly. I moved into this neighborhood because it seemed peaceful, respectful. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to live quietly, take care of my home, and mind my business. But over the last few weeks, I've been harassed, accused of racism, and targeted by false complaints, all because I installed a lock on my own gate, leading to my own pool. I held up a copy of the property survey. This pool? It's on my lot. Not shared. Not public. Not owned by the HOA. Here's the survey. I flipped through the packet. Here's the deed. Here's the police report. Here's the section in the HOA bylaws that says private property within fenced boundaries is not subject to board access or control. I laid it all out on the front table. And just so no one's confused, here's the footage of Karen's son trying to open my gate, without permission, before I even spoke a word to him. I watched as the screen of my tablet showed the teenager fiddling with the lock, climbing up on the fence, looking around to make sure no one saw him. The silence in the room grew heavier. I've never denied anyone access based on anything but ownership. This has never been about race. This has been about respect, for property, for boundaries, and for the truth. A few heads nodded. Karen didn't move. Her lips were tight, eyes fixed on the folder I had laid down like it had personally betrayed her. Someone in the back cleared their throat and asked the board a simple question. Is there anything in the HOA documents that says this pool belongs to the community? The board president looked trapped. He adjusted his glasses, flipped through a folder, and finally shook his head. No. It's privately owned. That was it. No apology. No admission of fault. But the tone in the room shifted. The tension loosened. Neighbors started whispering again, but now it was to each other, not about me. People were seeing through the story Karen had tried to tell. I sat back down. I didn't need to say anything else. Let the facts speak louder than the drama. The days after the meeting were quiet, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet I had hoped for. It was that fake, waiting to pounce kind of quiet. You could feel it in the way people looked at me. Less judgment now, sure, but more curiosity. Like they were all waiting to see what would happen next. And with Karen still living a few houses down, I had no doubt the storm wasn't over. It started again with small, petty things. One morning, I stepped outside and saw that someone had thrown a juice box into my yard. The next day, it was an empty chip bag floating in the pool. Then came the chalk messages. Right there on the sidewalk in front of my driveway, pool hog and selfish neighbor. It looked like a kid's writing, but let's be honest, it didn't take a genius to figure out where the idea came from. I cleaned it up and didn't say a word. The next weekend, I caught Karen's son near the gate again. He wasn't touching it this time. Just standing there with his phone out, recording the lock like he was building some kind of case. I walked outside and asked calmly, "You need something?" He didn't even look at me. "Just taking a video. This is gonna be evidence." "Evidence of what?" I asked. "Everyone knows what you're doing," he muttered. "We'll get you kicked out of here." I didn't argue. I went back inside and saved the footage from my own cameras, just in case. Then came the next blow, a notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't from the HOA directly, it was from the city zoning department. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint claiming that I was operating an unregistered private recreational facility. The language was ridiculous, but the city had to respond. An inspector showed up the next afternoon. Nice guy, actually. Told me straight up that it didn't look like a legit complaint, but they had to follow through with an inspection anyway. I walked him through the yard, showed him the lock, the fence, the pool equipment. He looked around, made a few notes, then shook his head. People can be real bold when they hide behind paperwork, he said. I laughed a little. You have no idea. Before he left, he told me everything was in order. No violations. No fines. He even said he'd note the complaint as possibly retaliatory, so if it happened again, they'd know. I added that report to my growing folder. It was starting to feel like I needed a file cabinet just to manage the nonsense coming from one house on the block. Then something strange happened. A neighbor I barely knew, a quiet woman named Mrs. Langford, knocked on my door. She brought over a pie. Said she made too much. But after a few minutes of small talk, she lowered her voice and said, I saw what's been going on. I just want you to know, not all of us are like them. It caught me off guard. I thanked her and she smiled. Karen's been like this for years. She ran off the last family that lived here too. You're just the first person who stood your ground. And just like that, something shifted. Over the next week, a few more neighbors started waving again. One guy stopped while walking his dog to ask about the smart lock, then ended the conversation with, honestly, I'm thinking of getting one too. It wasn't like I suddenly became popular, but the fear started fading. People were no longer buying the idea that I was the problem. And deep down, I think Karen felt it. She stopped sending flyers. Her son stopped lurking by the fence. The noise started to settle. But I wasn't naive. I knew how people like that worked. When they don't get their way, they don't quit. They wait. They look for cracks. And if they can't break you with rules or rumors, they'll try to make you so uncomfortable you give up on your own. That's why I didn't let my guard down. I kept the cameras running. I kept every piece of paper, every complaint, every report. Because if they wanted to play games with property and rights, I'd be ready with facts and receipts. And no matter what came next, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a lock on a pool gate anymore. It was about drawing a line and refusing to let anyone cross it. A week passed with no incidents. No chalk messages, no trash in the yard, no HOA letters taped to my door. I thought maybe, just maybe, the chaos had finally passed. But I should have known better. People like Karen don't just let things go. They simmer. And when they think the heat has died down, that's when they strike again. This time, it was sneakier. A neighbor tipped me off. Said there was a private group chat going around, some neighborhood WhatsApp thread where a few residents, mostly HOA loyalists, were still pushing the story that I was denying access to community spaces. That I was dividing the neighborhood. And the worst part? Karen's son had apparently shared a heavily edited video clip, just a few seconds long, of our first encounter at the gate. No sound. Just me pointing at him while he looked helpless. Out of context, it looked bad. The comments were worse. I didn't bother replying. I didn't message anyone back or try to explain myself to a group of people who weren't interested in facts. Instead, I pulled up my full footage, the unedited version with audio. I saved it to a backup drive and sent a copy to the HOA board, just in case. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a knock at the door. This time it wasn't Karen. It was Greg, one of the same board members who had been taking pictures near my pool. He stood there looking uncomfortable, holding a folder in one hand. I'm not here to argue, he said quickly. I think this has gone too far. I stayed silent, waiting. I saw the full video, he continued. It's not what they said it was. Look, I don't agree with how the HOA's been handling this. I didn't agree with the complaint either. That came from Karen, not the board. That caught me off guard. He rubbed the back of his neck. She's been running the show for too long. Most of us are just tired of the drama. I didn't know if it was genuine or just damage control, but I appreciated the honesty. Then he handed me the folder. Inside was a letter from the board, signed by 4 of the 5 members. It stated that the pool, fence, and lock were all confirmed to be private property and under no jurisdiction of the HOA. It wasn't a formal apology, but it was official enough to make things clear. I thanked him and closed the door, not quite sure what to make of it all. That night, the group chat screenshot made its way to me. Someone leaked the full video, the one I had saved and sent. The tone in the group changed almost instantly. People who had been stirring things up were now quiet. A few even left the chat altogether. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a victory message. I just watched it unravel quietly. Karen, of course, wasn't done. She tried one last move. She called animal control, claimed my dog barked too much during the day and was aggressive toward children. I only found out because the officer who showed up recognized my address. He knocked politely and explained the situation. I invited him in, showed him security footage, and let him meet my dog, a lazy old lab who barely barked even when someone rang the bell. The officer shook his head and said, "This is the third time this week I've had a bogus complaint in this neighborhood." I added that visit to my documentation too. It all became routine by then, something new every few days. Petty complaints, sideways glances, a rumor here, a whisper there. But I didn't budge. I didn't change the lock. I didn't tear down the fence. I didn't apologize for protecting what was mine. More than anything, I realized something important. Karen wasn't just angry about the lock. She was angry that I didn't play along, that I didn't cave to pressure, that I didn't care about her gossip or her fake outrage, and that, more than any deed or police report, is what really got under her skin. The fact that she couldn't control the narrative anymore. A week passed with no incidents. No chalk messages, no trash in the yard, no HOA letters taped to my door. I thought maybe, just maybe, the chaos had finally passed. But I should have known better. People like Karen don't just let things go. They simmer. And when they think the heat has died down, that's when they strike again. This time, it was sneakier. A neighbor tipped me off. Said there was a private group chat going around, some neighborhood WhatsApp thread where a few residents, mostly HOA loyalists, were still pushing the story that I was denying access to community spaces, that I was dividing the neighborhood. And the worst part? Karen's son had apparently shared a heavily edited video clip, just a few seconds long, of our first encounter at the gate. No sound, just me pointing at him while he looked helpless. Out of context, it looked bad. The comments were worse. I didn't bother replying. I didn't message anyone back or try to explain myself to a group of people who weren't interested in facts. Instead, I pulled up my full footage, the unedited version with audio. I saved it to a backup drive and sent a copy to the HOA board, just in case. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a knock at the door. This time it wasn't Karen. It was Greg, one of the same board members who had been taking pictures near my pool. He stood there looking uncomfortable, holding a folder in one hand. "I'm not here to argue," he said quickly. I think this has gone too far." I stayed silent, waiting. "I saw the full video," he continued. "It's not what they said it was. Look, I don't agree with how the HOA's been handling this. I didn't agree with the complaint either. That came from Karen, not the board. That caught me off guard." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's been running the show for too long. Most of us are just tired of the drama." I didn't know if it was genuine or just damage control, but I appreciated the honesty. Then he handed me the folder. Inside was a letter from the board, signed by 4 of the 5 members. It stated that the pool, fence, and lock were all confirmed to be private property and under no jurisdiction of the HOA. It wasn't a formal apology, but it was official enough to make things clear. I thanked him and closed the door, not quite sure what to make of it all. That night, the group chat screenshot made its way to me. Someone leaked the full video, the one I had saved and sent. The tone in the group changed almost instantly. People who had been stirring things up were now quiet. A few even left the chat altogether. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a victory message. I just watched it unravel quietly. Karen, of course, wasn't done. She tried one last move. She called animal control, claimed my dog barked too much during the day and was aggressive toward children. I only found out because the officer who showed up recognized my address. He knocked politely and explained the situation. I invited him in, showed him security footage, and let him meet my dog, a lazy old lab who barely barked even when someone rang the bell. The officer shook his head and said, "This is the third time this week I've had a bogus complaint in this neighborhood." I added that visit to my documentation too. It all became routine by then, something new every few days. Petty complaints, sideways glances, a rumor here, a whisper there. But I didn't budge. I didn't change the lock. I didn't tear down the fence. I didn't apologize for protecting what was mine. More than anything, I realized something important. Karen wasn't just angry about the lock. She was angry that I didn't play along, that I didn't cave to pressure, that I didn't care about her gossip or her fake outrage, and that, more than any deed or police report, is what really got under her skin. The fact that she couldn't control the narrative anymore. It was strange how normal things started to feel again. The sun still hit the pool just right in the morning. Birds still chirped from the same tree above the fence. And the hum of sprinklers came on like clockwork each evening. From the outside, everything looked just like before. But I had changed. I paid more attention, listened closer, and I didn't take normal for granted anymore. One Saturday, I was fixing a loose board on the side fence when I heard voices. Familiar ones. Karen's son and a couple of his friends were near the edge of the property, just out of sight. I didn't say anything, just listened. They were laughing, joking, and one of them said something about the guy with the pool being paranoid. Then I heard it. We should just hop the fence again, like before. What's he gonna do? Call the cops for swimming? Another laughed. Bet he's watching us right now on those creepy cameras. The first one replied, he locked it 'cause of me. Racist old dude. I stood up, walked slowly toward the edge, and made sure they saw me. I didn't yell. I didn't say a word. Just looked them in the eye. They froze. One of the boys awkwardly waved. Then they turned and walked away, quick and quiet. Just like that. Later that evening, I reviewed the footage. Sure enough, they'd been hanging near the gate. Not touching it this time, but close. Too close. I clipped the video, saved it to a folder, and moved on with my night. That moment stuck with me. Because no matter how much things had calmed down, that threat, the idea that someone still felt entitled to what wasn't theirs, never really disappeared. It just changed shape. It became quieter, more careful, but still present. A few days later, I found a note on my windshield. Folded in half, no name, written in shaky handwriting. Said, why not just let people swim? It's not that serious. No threat. No profanity. Just one short sentence dripping with entitlement. The kind that ignores the bigger picture. The kind that assumes you owe something to people who've never respected your space in the first place. I didn't respond, but I added it to the growing folder of passive-aggressive nonsense. Around that time, I started getting mail addressed to pool committee member. It was junk, clearly a joke. Someone thought they were being funny. Could guess who? The envelope was stuffed with pool supply coupons and fake sign-up sheets for neighborhood swim days. They even drew little cartoons on the back. One looked like a stick figure me yelling at a bunch of smiling kids swimming. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be annoyed, but I didn't throw it out. I kept every piece. Because here's the truth, when you stand your ground, some people will never forget that you didn't back down. And they'll keep poking, hoping one day you'll finally flinch. But the longer you stay calm, the less power they have. One afternoon, I walked out to the mailbox and noticed Karen's SUV parked farther down the road than usual. She wasn't in it, but her son was, driver's seat, window cracked, phone in hand. When he saw me, he quickly rolled up the window and looked away. I knew what was happening. He wanted me to react, to confront him, to say something loud enough to catch on camera. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I walked past, opened the mailbox, grabbed my mail, and walked back without a word. That night, a neighbor emailed me. She had been added to the HOA's unofficial group chat by mistake, and someone had shared a blurry photo of me outside. The caption said, "Still watching. Still locking out the community." She apologized for the message. Said she'd left the chat right after. I thanked her. Told her I wasn't surprised. Because by now, I understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't about the lock. It wasn't even about the pool. It was about the fact that I said no, and meant it. And that's something some people just can't handle.